But Bush did, the Bush campaign didn't seek a recount in the other counties.
Well, the campaign shouldn't determine how it's recounted.
Well, okay, are we on Zoom?
We are on Zoom.
Do we have anybody there who didn't give up on us?
We have 6 people still.
All right. Hello, Zoomers. I'm very sorry we got started late.
Blame me. It is on me.
It was a technical error. Let's see if I can get into the meeting. I tried signing in, but I didn't have the host ID. Can I sign in now?
Probably. I'm getting the slides going right now.
Okay. Not that they're that great for this week. Okay, where's the link? There it is. All right. And I better turn my volume off. All right. So raise your hands on Zoom if you're hearing us okay. Is everybody? Okay, I see Liz, Celeste, Chris. All right, so it looks like we're doing the sound fine. We have a number of people here in the live studio audience, and I want to thank you for coming again to a discussion of Making Democracy Count by Professor Ismar Volić. The first week we talked a little bit about the number of voting methods for single winner race, and I'm still hearing audio out of my own speaker. I don't know what's going on here. And what I wanted to talk about this week was to highlight especially chapters 12 and 13, which is the discussion of the gerrymander, the district drawing process, and the solution to gerrymandering, which is not more math and more high-powered computers, but I think the most elegant solution to the problem of the gerrymander as we know it in this country is being tested in Portland this year for the first time. It's a system that's been used in Cambridge, Massachusetts for a very long time, which is the single transferable vote with multiple winners. Instead of a single winner, you elect from districts where you have multiple candidates able to win seats. The purpose of multiple member districts is that you really defang the gerrymander. If you imagine the gerrymander as a monster as it was originally drawn in the cartoon that first identified the monster of the gerrymander, kind of looks like a dragon. If you want to defang the gerrymander, one of the best ways to do it is simply say, all right, we're going to have a lot less district boundaries, because the gerrymander occurs. The art of gerrymandering is drawing precise lines to either crack your opponent's vote totals, your concentration of your opponent's voters, you crack them by splitting them across multiple districts, or you carefully draw a district that makes your opponent overwhelmingly strong in that district so that they're wasting all of their votes or half of their votes. You know, the United States Congress, under a law passed in 1967, elects from single-member districts. And that was a well-intentioned but uninformed law passed to prevent the white states, it was Alabama in particular, electing Congress, when they lost the right to simply bar blacks from voting, they went to statewide at-large voting. Statewide at-large voting for Congress in a state like Alabama at that time was reliably producing all white. Right, so even in Birmingham, even in Montgomery, even in places where there was significant minority voting potential and voting power, it was simply being washed out. And so Congress, and like I said, I think well-intentioned, said you're not going to be able to submerge your minority populations by using at-large voting. We'll just say that everybody needs to vote in single-member districts. And we apportion the number of seats to your state, and you must divide your state into that many districts. Judith?
So, the microphone.
Oh, yeah, pass the microphone to Judith.
Is it on yet? So before this law was passed, did states like, I come from a state that had one congressman, so that doesn't help. So like the state of Washington, did all the congressmen, were they all voted at large then?
No, this was a response in the Old South to the Voting Rights Act.
Okay.
So it was not the typical way, all states did not use at-large voting by any means. But when the Voting Rights Act, I mean, there were several critical decisions in the 1960s. You had Reynolds versus Sims and somebody versus Carr, but basically you had the one person, one vote cases. And you could no longer simply divide your state so that the rural counties, under what was called the county rule in much of the South, you voted by counties. So you'd have these urban counties with huge numbers of minority voters who would get one representative, and you would get one representative in very sparsely populated rural counties. When the one person, one vote did away with the county rule and said you had to have districts with, as far as near as practicable, equal representation, you had to start trying to, that's when you suddenly made the art of gerrymandering really important. And if you could pack all of the, enough of the voters of the opposite party into a overwhelmingly heavy district for them, even if you couldn't wipe them out or submerge them into an all-white primary or an all-white general election result, you could essentially squander their votes away. Yes, there's a question online, I guess.
Celeste Landry shares, fun fact, the first woman elected to the U.S. House, Jeanette Rankin, was elected in a 2-member district. She came in second in the 2-winner contest.
So Jeanette Rankin of Montana, a real hero, a really fascinating person to research. I didn't realize that she had come in through a multi-member winner. But if we, in the United States in 1967, if we had said, rather than you must elect from single-member districts, which, started our 60 years and ongoing, graduate course in the art of gerrymandering, if we had said, or you can use multi-member districts, which a number of states had for state representatives at that time. Several states had multi-member districts for state House and state Senate. I don't think Senate, but House, such as Illinois and Maryland, to name 2 of them. And the nice thing about multi-member districts is, unless it's overwhelmingly one side or another, you tend to get representation from both of the major parties, and you get a flowering of minor parties who can in fact win representation. You can have more diverse voices in your legislature. So what we did instead was, in an attempt to defeat the all-white, the at-large voting meant to exclude minorities, we said you're going to elect from single-member districts. But single-member district requirement means you're going to have, in this country, you're going to have gerrymandering. And now, 60 years later, 50 some years later, we have exquisite, precise, AI-assisted gerrymandering that, when you couple with the databases that commercial entities have on everybody in this room, everybody in this audience, when you look at the hundreds of millions of files kept by private data brokers on each of us, and the ability to have high-speed computing map those to your address and your voting history, whether they know how you voted or not, they know when you voted, and they know when you voted if you voted in a partisan primary, which for most of the country is an issue, right? It's very easy to identify your partisan affiliation in most of the country. And of course, they can match that to any signs of partisanship, your donations to charities, your donations to political parties that are registered in the federal database. So we have essentially the ability to draw up the electorate to give you a custom fit. Would you like to win by 52% in this district? Okay, here's the map. I mean, the art of gerrymandering is exquisite, and it is incredibly powerful now. Because of the GIS data we have, the local geography data that allows a house-by-house gerrymandering. So the solution is not, in my opinion, these commissions, that we're going to have a better class of people or a more enlightened class of people or a less partisan class of people drawing the boundaries, because it's really the issue is that by drawing boundaries, we inevitably force people into what we're saying is the most important thing about you is where you live. If we get rid of the single member districts and we go to multi-member districts, we draw a lot fewer boundaries and we have a lot better chance of simply making gerrymandering not worth the trouble. If you have 3-member districts, the Portland system that is being tested, and we're going to watch a little video here in a minute about a very simple and elegant solution that is easily transferable to the state level, in my opinion. Certainly for the state house, we should look at this as a model. What Portland is doing is going to a 12-member council, and they're dividing it into 4 quadrants, 4 geographic quadrants in the city of Portland. So each council, each quadrant will elect 3 members, okay? And what they're doing is they're using a ranked choice ballot and what some people call the full representation version of single transferable vote. Your ballot is counted on the first round, everybody's ballot is counted to the first choice. If anyone has more than the threshold needed to win a seat, they're declared elected. And the threshold in a 3-member district is, anybody know? 25% plus 1, because if 3 people have 25% plus 1, There can't be a fourth person with 20, so it's, where n is the number of seats, you use n plus 1 as the divisor. You have 100, so if you had 4 seats up for election in a district, the threshold needed would be 20%, right? Because it's n plus 1. N is 4 seats, add 1. If 4 people get 20% plus 1 vote, there can't be a fifth winner. So the threshold in a 3-member quadrant of Portland is 25%. That means that Republicans are likely to win, or we would say conservatives, are likely to go from 0 representation in Portland to potentially having as much as a quarter of the seats if they win 1 seat in each quadrant, which in my opinion is much healthier for the city of Portland than the current system, which is all at large, and there is no conservative, no Republican voice in Portland. And if you don't like that example, you can take it to a place that is, overwhelmingly red and say that Democrats or liberals in those places deserve some voice as well. It also makes it much harder to gerrymander, because to effectively gerrymander with a threshold of only 25%, it's very difficult to do. Because you would have to be drawing, you would almost have to draw non-contiguous lines. As long as you're drawing, boundaries that are, what the mathematicians call contiguous, where you can't take your pen up, and, as long as you have to draw a continuous line, it's very difficult to it's easy with a 50% threshold, right? Because you can, just a few votes either way draws the line. But if you had to try to gerrymander somebody out of a 25% share, it would be impossible to do. I'm not even sure I can figure out how you could gerrymander to exclude.
Well, especially when you could do it for one district, but
You,
but then it'd be hard on the other.
it would be almost well, it would backfire on you in the other districts, and it would be such a bizarrely shaped. I'm not even sure if you could continue. Assuming that the voters are not distributed in, within a city, assuming that the voters are somewhat homogeneously distributed, I don't think you could even do it within a single district without drawing some houses on every block would have to be included and some would be excluded, which would be very tough to show. I think.
You wanted to work in the state too, where
Pardon?
you wanted to work in the state as well.
Yes, yeah, so, it's kind of like a Shaggy Dog story, in the sense of, we could talk at length, and he does, I think, a really nice job talking about the mathematics of analyzing gerrymandering. But I think the punchline is, let's not talk about gerrymandering. Let's talk about proportional representation systems that solve the gerrymandering in a much more elegant way. I should have thanked the League of Women Voters for helping host this forum, and also Olympia Unitarian Universalist Congregation helping host this forum, the Faith in Action Committee. And what reminded me of saying that is that the League of Women Voters has been banging its head, in my opinion, fruitlessly for years on the issue of gerrymandering, because we're simply behind it's like also banging our heads against campaign finance reform. The League, and I'm a member of the League, so I'm not criticizing other people, but we have been beating our heads on the gerrymander and on the campaign finance, even as both are getting more and more sophisticated and more out of control. Both are much more effectively addressed by multi-member districts than any reform I can imagine. And the reason I argue that multi-member districts are the solution to campaign finance reform is that when you have a lower threshold that is more proportional to your share of the vote, it is much more difficult to buy the undecided votes that you need, and you defeat the winner-take-all system. Right now, we have a winner-take-all election system, right? We're going to have one winner who gets 100% of the power, the representation for that district. And so if you look at the game theory, the mathematics of the game theory, any dollar you can raise, you should raise and should throw into the pile, because your gain if you win is 100% and your gain if you lose is 0. Whereas if you have many districts where there is proportional voting, a representation system that elects in proportion, rough proportion to the candidate's strength, you don't have the zero sum, and you don't have the, well, you might as well throw it all on the fire, right? If voters, if you're trying to sway a tiny handful of the least involved, I see a question, and let me just finish this thought. Most of the inordinate money we're spending on this election, certainly nationally at this point, but it's also true within candidate races at the state level, is you're not trying to affect the partisans on the other side. You're trying to discourage them from voting, or you're trying to reach this tiny slice of the least involved and the least informed voters, which is the definition of the undecided voter. And that's inordinately expensive. So we have these campaigns that are literally billion-dollar enterprises that should, by any rational measure, if it was not a winner-take-all, zero-sum game, we wouldn't be spending anywhere like that amount. What's the question?
Celeste Landry online shares Boulder, Colorado, where Neil and I live, not in the same household, used the single transferable vote from 1917 to 1947, electing 3 council members every 2 years for 6-year terms. We would like to use STV again, but the election administrators won't conduct an STV election until the Secretary of State promulgates rules to do so. Then she shares, in 2020, LWVUS adopted a voter representation / electoral systems position that advocates for proportional representation. Paula Lee, on this Zoom call, did yeoman's work to get it adopted.
And Paula is a voice from my past for many years and has been a real hero for promoting better elections for a long time. So everyone, thumbs up to Paula. And thank you, Celeste. That's the overview or the introduction I want to make. What I have now is a video. If Carbon has it queued up.
So was that email or?
I sent you an email with a link to the city of Portland with a time mark. I sent it to your tech.
Yeah, let me double check that because I was looking earlier and didn't see it.
Well, actually, I should find that email, huh? Yes,
Okay, sorry, that got sent to my spam folder for some.
I am spam. Okay, so, and I gave you time marks. So this is a short video that the city of Portland is showing its voters, and I'm not gonna show the 2-hour video, but there's like about a 10-minute clip that tries to help voters understand how the votes will transfer in the upcoming general election here in November. And we're calling that up. And this is a system that I would advocate for certainly state house multi-member districts and congressional house multi-member districts. We would divide the state into 3, or depending on the state, you know, you could imagine 2, 3, 4 member districts in, depending on the state. And are you at the time mark?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and bring the sound up and let's start that. Yeah, Zoom and YouTube only crash when you need them.
Their fourth choice. So if you rank the same candidate more than once and we need to look at your backup choices, if you ranked them again, we would just have to ignore them and skip over them because that candidate is no longer in the race. We can go to the next slide. Because your backup choice is their ballot. That is the only time that we will look at your backup choices. So a voter can cast their ballot this way. We will end it 3. Now I get that because this system is different, some folks may think if I count this first choice, you rank 1 first choice, 1 second choice, and so on. The good news,
voter education and report, share that people with you today.
I'm up next. All right, I think I'm up next and we can go to the next slide. Hi, everybody. My name is Grace Ramsey. I'm the co-founder and co-director of an organization called Democracy Rising. But for the purposes of today, I've been working with the city for over a year to make sure that we are providing voter education to folks and really getting the message out there in both conventional channels and unconventional channels. So really happy to be joining you today. So I'm going to take us a little bit through more about the ballot itself and how you're going to be using it this year and what it does. So by the end of this presentation, the goal is that you will know how to mark your ranked choice ballot and that you will know where to go to learn more about ranked choice voting. We have a limited amount of time today, and there's a lot of stuff that you can look into if you'd like, but if all you're looking for is how to rank your ballot, then you should leave here ready to go, and we can go to the next slide. All right, so in 2022, Portlanders voted to make a few big changes to the city government. There was actually 3 big ones. So first, allowing voters to rank candidates in order of preference rather than just picking one. So that moving to ranked choice voting, which is largely what we're talking about today. Second, they created 4 new geographic districts. So those will elect 3 members to represent the geographic district. So that would expand the city council to 12 members. Third, and the final change is we will change from the current form of government, which is a commission form of government, where the city council runs agencies and makes policy and does all of that. Whereas now we will have a city council that focuses just on setting policy, and then the mayor will be elected citywide to run day-to-day operations, and they'll have the help of a professional city manager or city administrator, sorry. So our hope is that the changes mean that the government is able to be more responsive to folks and better represent everyone. So they want to be effective, accountable, and representative of every area of the city. We can move to the next slide. All right, so let's get into ranked choice voting, which is, I'm sure, why most of you are here. So what is ranked choice voting? It's kind of in the name. To vote, you rank your choices. So instead of just looking at a list of candidates and having to pick one, you're able to look at that list and say, okay, who is my favorite candidate? All right, well, if for some reason I can't have my favorite candidate, who's my next best choice, right? So you can rank as many or as few of the candidates as you'd like, up to 6. You are not required to rank all 6. You can rank one and leave it if you'd like to. That is totally up to you as a voter. But one thing that I just said a little bit before, but I want to reiterate, is that I like to think of those second, third, fourth, and so on choices as sort of backups. And so you use those, your vote is going to do as much as possible to elect your first choice candidate. But in the case that they're no longer in the race, either because they were eliminated or in the case of your city council, they've already been elected, those backup choices can make sure that you get the representation that you want out of this election. You can help elect people to office. The way I like to think about it is your first choice is the candidate you love, second choice is the candidate you like, third choice is the candidate you like a little less, so on and so forth. One thing to be super clear about is we are only encouraging voters to rank candidates that they would be comfortable supporting for office. Because your ballot's job is to do as much as it can to get you representation, ranking someone that you don't like on your ballot, you don't want to give them the chance of having earned some support from your ballot. So those are some of our key recommendations. The other thing that ranked choice voting does, you may have noticed or not noticed, is it gets rid of the need for primaries. So you will have noticed there were county election primaries and state election primaries this year, but there were not city primaries this year. So instead of narrowing the field earlier in the year, we make sure that all of the candidates are running when the most voters are going to show up in the general election on November 5th, or the last day I would say is on November 5th. And so that's a slight difference as well, is we don't have that sort of winnowing process earlier in the year with a primary, and voters are able to rank their choices. We can head to the next slide. All right, so you can see here we have a sample ballot, and the 4 points on the right are kind of our key guiding stars when you're ranking your ballot. So step by step, we're going to go through how you would fill this out. So I think of working in this ballot left to right. So on the left side, we see our candidates listed. And then as we go to the right, we see our different choices or rankings. So I'm going to go on the left side and pick my favorite candidate. Let's say my lucky number has always been 6. So I'm going to pick candidate 6 as my first choice. Now, one thing to note, as you see that top point on the right side, is you are going to mark one choice per column, just one. So one first choice. Now, you don't have to use all of those rankings, as I said, but I would like to make sure I have a backup choice on my ballot. So then I'm going to look at the candidates and I'm going to rank my second choice. Okay. All right. Second choice is candidate 1. And then I can keep going from there throughout my rankings. So one thing to note is that my 5th choice is a write-in candidate. So if you are going to use or write down a write-in candidate for one of your choices, that you are more than welcome to do so. You will have write-ins. That has not changed with ranked choice voting, but you want to make sure that writing the candidate's name in the candidate line or that column is not enough. You have to write down their name and you have to fill in the bubble for that candidate to indicate that they are one of your choices. So those are the keys. You mark one first choice, one second choice, one third choice, and so on, as many or as few as you wish, knowing that ranking a second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth choice does not hurt the chances of your favorite candidate or your first choice, right? Your vote is going to work as hard as possible to elect your first choice candidate. And the only time that those backup choices will come into play is if either your first choice candidate is out of the race altogether, they were eliminated, or if they're elected and you may have a small portion of your vote go to help your next choice just in city council races. So no matter how many rankings you use, ranking those backup choices will never hurt your first choice. Let's talk about some tips we have for how to fill out the ballot now. We can go to the next slide. All right, so the yellow circles on the left are highlighting what is a ballot error. And I want to say one thing at the top here. This is called an overvote. That's how this is referred to. And it's actually the most common error in any kind of election, regardless of ranked choice voting. But I do want to recognize that we are electing more than one person in some of these races. But it's really key that you rank one first choice, one second choice, and so on. The good news, even if somebody does happen to make this mistake, is we will not toss out their ballot in this situation. But we do have to be clear where we understand the voter's intent versus where we don't. So because this voter ranked 4 candidates for their first choice, we can't necessarily say, oh, they ranked these 4, but we think they really meant this candidate. Or we can't split up their vote into 4 little pieces and just give a little bit to each of those candidates. Because we can't determine the voter's intent here because they don't have one first choice, we would have to ignore that ranking, right? So we would skip over that first rank, and then we would go to the next choice that they had on their ballot. So you can see here, that's candidate C. So if you ranked a ballot this way, we would not be able to count this first choice, but what would basically happen is candidate C would become your first choice, candidate D would become your second choice, candidate E would become your third choice, and candidate F would become your fourth choice, right? So we would just shift those over. So while this is an error, it doesn't mean this ballot can't be counted, but we always want to make sure that voters can have their ballots counted in the way that they intended. We can go to the next slide. All right, so here is another example of something that's maybe not an error per se, but we always want to make sure voters are making informed decisions when they're filling out their ballots. So this voter really likes candidate A, and that's great. But as I said before, your vote is going to do everything possible to help elect your first choice candidate, and ranking backup choices doesn't hurt your first choice. But what this voter did is they ranked the same candidate more than once. They ranked candidate A for their first 3 choices. Now, this ballot on the first choice will do exactly what this voter intended. It will count for candidate A. But if candidate A is no longer in the race and we go to look at their second choice, it's the same candidate who is no longer in the race, and the same for rank 3. Now, I get that because this system is different, some folks may think if I give this candidate my first 3 rankings, it gives them 3 votes. But I really want to make it clear that that is not how ranked choice voting works. Your ballot, you have 1 vote, and it will count for 1 candidate until that they are no longer in the race. And that is the only time that we will look at your backup choices. So a voter can cast their ballot this way. It will count for candidate A, but it is the same thing as ranking candidate A as their first choice, candidate F as their second choice, candidate G as their third choice, and candidate H as their fourth choice. So if you rank the same candidate more than once and we need to look at your backup choices, if you ranked them again, we would just have to ignore them and skip over them because that candidate is no longer in the race. We can go to the next slide. All right, so how is the winner determined? This is really the thing that makes ranked choice voting different. Other than the different experience for voters, this is how it's different and how we find our winners, right? So in a ranked choice voting election, the number of votes the candidate needs to be elected is determined by the number of seats that we're electing. So let's start with talking about our citywide races. So let's say it's for mayor. There is 1 mayor that represents the entire city. So we are electing 1 seat. So with a ranked choice voting election, the way we figure that out is how many votes can 1 candidate get that 2 candidates can't? And that's why it comes out to 50% plus 1. That's how many votes somebody needs to win. If somebody gets more than half of the votes, no one else can get more than half of the votes, right? Because if that happened, we'd have more than 100% of the votes and something went terribly wrong. So that's how we figure out our winner, is what's the smallest number of votes that 1 person can get that 2 people can't, right? Hopefully you're with me so far. So then let's move on to the city council race, where we are electing 3 city councilors from each of the 4 districts, which means we are electing 3 seats. So we ask the same question. How many votes can 3 candidates get that 4 candidates can't? And the answer comes out to more than a quarter of the votes. Because if we have more than a quarter of the votes and 3 candidates earning that, a 4th candidate can't get that same number. And again, otherwise, if they do, we have too many votes represented and something went wrong. So that's how we figure out our winners, and that's how we figure out how many votes each candidate needs. So that's also when we're talking about a little later on how we count the votes. That's why we need everybody's votes to be counted in this process, so we know how many is half or how many is a quarter. So that's how we're going to count. We're going to figure out how many votes a candidate needs to win, and that's a little bit about how your ballot's going to work. I am sure I will be back during the Q&A, and I will pass it back to Francisca.
Asking celebrity doctors.
Hi everyone, Francisca Garcia here. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I'm going to walk you really quickly through a mock election. So let me get my, oh, sorry, my things aren't showing up right now. Okay, perfect. So if you went to our event page, you might have seen this mock election. I will be putting the link in after I go through this, so you get a chance to do it in case you haven't. But I'd like you to just follow along as I fill in my ballot. If you notice, I put mint chocolate chip in my rank 1. This is during our in-person town halls, we served ice cream, and Portlanders were able to vote on the ice cream flavors they wanted to see at our town halls. So I put my first rank vote for mint chocolate chip, second for Marionberry cobbler, third for triple chocolate brownie, and fourth for Java chip. And now we're going to go look at the results. And the first thing that we do, as Grace was saying, we have to look at the threshold. So we'll see it here. It's 160 votes of the 639. And this is an example of a multi-winner election. So this is what it's kind of going to look like when we're electing our city council members. So again, we have to remember the threshold is determined by the number of seats that are available. And 160 is the 25% plus 1 of 639 votes. When we go look at sort of the results visualization, we see that right here, there's a line really handy at 160 votes. That tells us this is the magic number that a candidate needs to reach in order to win. Whenever we start a round, we first check, did anyone meet the threshold? Did anyone reach that magic number of 160 votes? We see that mint chocolate chip, that was my rank 1 choice. It's the closest at 92 votes, but no one has reached that number. So we're gonna eliminate the option with the least amount of votes. So that's strawberry in this case. And people who put strawberry in their number 1 rank have their vote transferred over to their second favorite. We see here, for example, 2 people who had ranked strawberry in their number 1 rank, ranked orange creamsicle in their next rank. And so again, we have to go check our threshold. Did anyone reach it? No, no one did. So again, we have to go look at which option got the least number of votes. That was Cookie Monster ice cream with 32 votes. And those votes get transferred over to voters' next option. And this is going to look kind of the same for a few rounds. Again, no one is reaching the threshold, but we see that some options are kind of getting there, getting close. Again, we're going to advance a little bit into the rounds. And here's where it starts to get really interesting. Keep in mind, again, no one has reached the threshold. We see that mint chocolate chip, triple chocolate brownie are getting really close, but again, not quite there yet. Pistachio with its 80 votes, it has the least amount of votes, so it's going to get eliminated. And we see it gets mint chocolate chip super close, but not quite yet. And Java chip, that was my rank 4 vote, has the least number of votes, so it's going to get eliminated. And we see that mint chocolate chip is our first winner because it reached the threshold and exceeded it. And one thing that is interesting to note in our city council member elections, again, we have to have 3 winners, and there's this thing called the surplus vote that happens, which means all of the surplus votes, a fraction of everyone who ranked that winning candidate has a fraction of their vote transferred over to the candidate they ranked next. So remember how I ranked mint chocolate chip in my number 1 rank? A fraction of my vote, along with everyone who ranked mint chocolate chip in there, has a fraction of their vote put to their next choice if it's still in the running. So my number 2 pick was Marionberry cobbler, and we'll see right here that a fraction of my vote gets transferred over. and that allows Marion Barry Cobbler to reach that threshold. When this happened, it also caused Triple Chocolate Brownie to also reach that threshold. So we now have 3 winners. And I will be putting both.
So there was a lot going on there that I want to call to your attention. There were some very subtle, precise statements that you may not have focused on. In the very first promo or very first intro, she said, there's 4 things that are going on. And one of the ones that should interest you based on the reading from last week would be that she said, your vote for your first choice will never be hurt by your other rankings. Now notice that she didn't say your vote for, the loose way to talk about a ranked ballot, a preference ballot, is sometimes people will say, your vote for somebody you like more will never hurt somebody you ranked below that. But we saw that in the examples, it is possible that when you're doing the ranked choice voting, that depending on the order in which your second, third, fourth, fifth choices are ranked, it is possible to hurt a lesser favorite. Your vote for your true favorite will never, it's invulnerable. I mean, it's your most, as she put it, this is the one you love. And by ranking everyone you love the best, I guess your vote can never hurt, will never hurt your favorite, but there are paradoxical situations mathematically possible that if your vote, if your favorite is eliminated, is not successful, then ranking them first might cause them to be eliminated in a different order and thus change the outcome. So what they tried to say, I think, was very specific about your ranking of a lower ranked candidate will never hurt your first choice. Because the first choice is basically just your plurality vote. I mean, it's your attempt to say, this is the one. If I could only vote for one, this is who it would be. The example that they used there was interesting in that they showed the elimination of the lesser ranked, right? When you, I think everybody here got pretty easily that when you do a ranked single transferable vote, you eliminate from the bottom up, it's called, right? The ones who lose, you get rid of them and you transfer their votes. What most people have never seen before is the transfer of voter surplus. And this is why advocates, including myself, I will, own up to that, call this the full representation method. It is an attempt to give every vote as much voting power as it can have. And so what it does is it transfers the surplus just as if it was a transfer of an eliminated vote, so that every vote is squeezed for as much voting impact as it can have. Carl?
I'm not understanding this, sir.
Oh, yeah. So Carl said he doesn't understand the surplus.
I'm not sure I do either.
Explain it to me, maybe. Oh, I have more to say. Go ahead, Mr. Explanation.
Oh, okay. Let's focus again on the weakest, the other end, which is the eliminated candidates. You understand the vote transfer there, right?
Right. Is the surplus just the votes for the number one candidate, the votes that are more than are needed? He only needs to be ahead of the next one by one.
Yes.
If he's ahead by 5, 4 of those are surplus?
Yes.
So
If-
how do
if
they
you-
how do they get transferred somewhere else?
Exactly. So let's go back to the elimination, bottom up, talk about how the transfer works, and then we'll flip that to a surplus transfer. Bottom up, you say that each vote for, what was the bottom flavor, some wacky flavor, strawberry or something, it was for an eliminated candidate, and so 100% of each voter's vote, the 12 voters who voted for strawberry, you compute the transfer fraction, since their vote is completely unused, since nobody voted for strawberry, right? You transfer 1.0 to their next choice. Okay? So that's the part that gets missed, is that because you don't need to compute the fraction is 0, right? How much of the voter, when you're transferring from the bottom up, you say, how much has that voter's vote been used up already? And the answer is 0, because, strawberry was thrown out, right? But when you're going at the other direction, you say, okay, mint chip was the big winner, right? Let's say mint chip ends up with, after one round of transfers from the bottom up, and it could be 3 or 4 rounds into the election, but at some point they cross the threshold, right? And let's say they end up with 180 votes. And I don't remember where she was, but it was about 180. And the threshold was 160. So you have a surplus fraction, you have 20 votes surplus, right?
Why and how are they transferred? That's what I don't get.
So what you do is you say, so in a 20 of 180, every voter has voted 1/9, 0.11111, too much, right? You only needed 89% of each of those voters' votes to reach 160. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but so what?
Well, if what you're saying is, just like we wanted to give the ones who voted for eliminated candidates the chance to have their vote counted if possible, we have now too many votes for one of the candidates by a fraction of 20 over 180. We will assign that to each voter's second choice.
Why? I don't see the need to do that.
Okay.
What's the argument in favor of that?
Making every vote count as much as possible. But imagine the candidate with, imagine the race in Portland or in any multi-member district where you had an overwhelming favorite and 12 also-rans. If you had someone who was elected with twice as many votes as needed, if you don't transfer the votes, what you end up with is a very small number of voters picking the second and third winners.
Which in particular will not be the threshold because it will be not voted.
You will have, to get the threshold for all three.
It seems to me, and maybe I'm missing something, if this is a district where you need 3 winners, then as long as you've got, this guy had the most, this guy had the second most, and this guy had the third most, what's wrong with that? It seems like you're adding unnecessary complications. You're confusing the whole electorate.
Well, let's come back to that. There's a question online, I see.
So Neil McBurnett shares, suppose everyone agrees on a certain candidate and they get a top vote from every voter. You don't want to exhaust all the votes and have no one come in second. Instead, distribute the excess from each vote to their next choice.
So that's a hypothetical that is an extreme case, but it does answer the question about why do you do transfers. As Sam said, if you have a strong favorite, a sun, and then these little tiny planets, you won't reach the threshold needed to win a seat for anyone but the sun.
Well, this is just off the top of my head, but it seems like if you're doing ranked choice voting, let's say 100% of the voters go for one guy. Okay, but if it was ranked choice voting, there were votes for number 2 and votes for number 3. So you just knock off that one guy and do the calculation all over again, as if that top winner wasn't in his votes. In other words, if you do ranked choice voting without that top guy, then you'll end up with the second and third. That seems simpler.
It is simpler. What your method is simpler, but it is not in accordance with the idea of ranked choice voting, which is that each voter's vote should be used as much as possible to lead to representation. Let me give someone else online a chance to come at it, because I think this is another way to say it might be helpful if somebody has one.
So this is actually just from me, from Carbon behind the desk.
Great.
But I guess my thought process goes to, if there was a situation where there was Party A and Party B, and Party A is running 3 candidates, and everybody has a favorite in that party. They all love candidate 1, so they all put candidate 1 as their first choice. If you don't do the surplus voting, even if Party A had 99% of the vote, people wanted those other candidates more than they wanted Party B. You'd still end up with Party B with only 1% of the vote.
Well put. Thank you. That's an excellent way to put it. Put this in more practical terms. If you had a slate of very progressive candidates in an urban center, or conversely, if you were doing this for county elections in a very rural county, if you had the hardcore slate of conservatives, but there's one who is the dean and the overwhelming, longtime incumbent, if they suck up all the votes, as they might well, you could end up with a paradoxical of the lower ranking, the weaker party electing 2 members from that district, because you didn't transfer the surplus from the strong finisher. I mean, the surplus is simply the opposite or the negative of the bottom-up transfers. We're saying this vote hasn't been used yet, it wasn't needed yet, didn't help elect anybody. We want to squeeze from both directions, the top down and the bottom up. We want every bit of every vote to count until we have 3 winners. And it is mathematically more cumbersome, thank goodness for computers, but here's the way I like to visualize it, and I've used to use this in demonstrations when speaking to large groups. I would say, let's vote for your favorite pizza topping or whatever. And I would send groups of people. Now you go in that corner if you like pepperoni, you go in that corner if you like sausage, and you go in that corner if you like mushrooms, and you go in that corner if you like black olive, right? And then when you look and there's very few people for the black olive, the transfer from the bottom up is simply to say to those people, okay, black olive, you lose, go to your second choice. And they literally would walk and stand in the corner, and everybody gets that, right? You understand. But if pepperoni has 3/4 of the people, and this is sometimes what happens, is you have very few people in the corner, and you say, well, pepperoni, you've got 3/4, And, you know, literally only one person could be elected from the threshold at that point, unless we transfer some of those votes. And the way we would do it is we would say, okay, compute the excess fraction. You have 50% too much, so half of you go to your second choices, and we figure out, okay, pepperoni's declared elected, but it has a surplus. Let's figure out who gets the second seat or the third seat. Carbon.
Chris Mason shares, if your vote is worth $1 and you used up 80 cents for your first choice, then you get 20 cents back to spend on your second and third choices. That way, you and everyone else get to use the whole power of your vote.
I like that as well. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, a vote is a buck. Why shouldn't you get change for a buck if the price of candidates is $25.01? Why shouldn't you be able to say, I want to put my whole buck towards electing Joe, but if Joe's got way more vote than needed, I want the change back, and I'll tell you who to give my change to.
That's the best example.
Yeah, I think that's
That's your 25%.
I think Chris Mason, that was from, thank you. I think the buck and change is a good way to talk about the surplus vote power. It is mathematically more cumbersome, but it does fulfill the ideal of a democratic voting system that says we want to, as best we can discern, we want to give the voters preference into reality. Dave?
Yeah, so just to make sure I'm following this right, and I think I've got it, but I want to state it. Let's say we're dealing with nice, simple percentages. I've got a 20-cent return on my initial vote. My vote turned out it only cost me 80 cents out of the dollar
Right?
with my first choice.
26 cents, right?
No,
No, Judith.
He's got 20,
Judith.
he's got change of 20%. He's got 20 cents
It
change.
cost me $1 to make my vote. But
Your vote is worth
I paid-
$1.
It's worth $1, but it only cost me 80 cents to get my first choice.
First choice, yes.
So what's going to happen now is now we're going back to thinking in terms of ballots. We've got a whole stack of the person who has exceeded the threshold. And all of those ballots are now going to be run through again. And in my case, I picked a pistachio as my second pick.
Let me
second choice.
let me stop you there.
So pistachio is going to get 20 cent,
Wait.
20% of a vote.
Dave, wait. I want to stop you just because you have said something that is bound to cause trouble, and I've learned this the hard way. When you said those ballots will be run through again, no, everybody's ballots will be run through again. There is suspicion about complexity, and one of the things that get people's suspicion going is the thought that the election administrators are choosing which ballots to run through. When you actually do the vote counts, you count the votes once and you get a slate of profiles, just like in the book. It says, you record the vote profiles. Every round, every vote is counted again. So it is truly one person, one vote. It is not that some voters get extra chances to have
Right.
their votes counted. And it's really important.
Yeah, I agree.
That people don't hear that some voters get their votes counted more often than others. Everybody's votes are counted once, and each round of balloting, whether you're using only bottom-up transfers or this full representation with surplus and bottom-up, if you do bottom-up and surplus transfers, you eliminate, and then you see if anyone's got a threshold. If so, you transfer the surplus, and then you do the second round of counting. But every ballot is counted the same number of times because that's real important. So now
Right.
ask your question.
Yeah, okay, so you've clarified for me what I meant, was that my second pick, when they do
Everybody's
the
second
run-through,
pick.
everybody's second pick is not everybody's second pick.
Well,
Okay, let's,
every voter only has one top choice at any one time.
Right.
For some voters, that's still their first choice.
so initially, let's go back to the bottom then for a moment.
Okay.
Whatever it was, Cookie Monster ice cream got eliminated.
Bubblegum, whatever.
Okay. If I voted for them number one, what happens to my second pick?
Well, we cross your vote out for them because they're eliminated.
Right.
And then
My
we
second
count
pick-
it, we finish counting every other vote and we see, does anybody win? No. Okay. Now, after eliminating your top choice, which was eliminated, when we count your ballot, we go to your new top choice. Remember that every vote that has more than one, multiple rankings has only one top choice at any moment. It might not be your top choice. It might be your fifth choice. If you like unpopular candidates, you might not vote for a winner until your fifth choice.
Right.
But when the time comes, your full dollar will go to try to help that person cross the threshold.
As long as I did put,
As long as you didn't, as long as your
all the
ballot's not exhausted.
right,
Now, it is possible, and this is the other thing that sometimes some critics get really wrapped around the axle about is, does it guarantee a majority winner in the single winner form? And no, it doesn't guarantee a majority winner if by majority you mean of all the initial vote populace. Because some people choose not to rank other candidates. And so their ballots are exhausted, and so you end up deciding a majority, what he calls in the book, the eventual majority. Right? It may be less than the initial majority because you may have, after 5 rounds of elimination, you may have had enough voters choose to only bullet vote that you don't have a majority of the final electorate. You have a majority of the final electorate, but you may have had extra voters at the beginning who didn't bother ranking other candidates. So you are still getting a majority of the eventual voting pool. You're trying to have every voter vote as much as possible.
There really is no perfect system.
Well, this is not as complicated as, this would be easy if you were used to it. I mean, anybody who has done, a tax form, this is far easier than computing your 1040. I mean, the voter simply ranks their votes in the order of preference. The transfers are more sophisticated than we use now, but it eliminates an awful lot of pain and suffering that we are inflicted with now because we only choose to get the plurality vote. Judith.
Okay. Oregon or Portland is doing this year, right?
For the
Portland?
city
For the
council.
city council. On their ballot for the state, they're voting on ranked choice voting, right? Is that
Yeah.
correct? So,
But not this full representation form.
no, they're doing something, so, for the people of Portland who are trying to deal with this in the city and at the same time looking at their ballot for the state and looking at something slightly different, but still different than they've done before. They've got, I'm thinking about these people from Portland we've been talking to who weren't even talking about the Portland election. They were talking about the state ranked choice
The
voting.
state ranked choice voting has been used in Benton County for a couple of elections now. The single transferable vote, the ranked choice voting that they're talking about for the rest of the system is what we would call bottom up.
That's what like Alaska's done.
Yeah, bottom up is what Alaska has done, right? You rank the candidates. If no one wins, you eliminate from the bottom up until somebody wins. Carbon has a hand up.
Chris Mason shares the state RCV is the same as the mayor RCV version.
Right. So it's for it's left single member districts in place for the county, the state legislature, state senate, which is essentially what they used to call instant runoff voting, which is single winner ranked choice voting. So it's far better than what they have. It's far better than what Washington has. It's not as good as a proportional multi-member system, but given the size of the campaign and the state of Oregon, I'll be surprised if it passes statewide. Carl and then Carbon?
In places where it has been adopted, was it voted in by the voters at large, or did like a city council decide to do it?
The voters of Alaska, Maine adopted it statewide. Minnesota, the Twin Cities adopted it through referendum. People on this call, Paula Lee and others, are aware of a number of places, Santa Clara, a number of cities in California. All of it has been through the voters. I don't think there's a single place in America where the politicians are ahead of the voters on this. Well, I mean, it is. The super partisans don't like it because it gives voters a lot more power rather than partisan politics. And if you look at Mary Peltola, did I say her name right? Peltola. You know, Mary Peltola is a great example. This was for the sole congressional seat in Alaska. The Republicans had been making hay for a long time in Alaska and just had a death grip on federal representation. But when the ranked choice voting came in Alaska, Nick Begit's voters broke heavily for Mary Peltola instead of for Sarah Palin. And, you know, votes that formerly would have meant that in the way that they finished, Sarah Palin would have won. You know, she was claiming betrayal and treachery and treason because the voters' preference for not Sarah Palin was elected. There was a question online?
Celeste Landry says, no, let's call the single winner instant runoff voting and the Seattle method top two bottom up ranked voting. In a separate message she then shared, the presidential primary delegate allocation uses 15% threshold bottoms up ranked voting to figure out the number of national convention delegates for each presidential candidates. There's then another comment after that, but I'll let you talk first.
Yes, I think that's all true, and I think that's more sophisticated than I want to get into here, which is more focused on simple candidate politics. You know, the thing about ranked choice voting is that ranked choice is a method of balloting, and as we discussed last week, you can apply to those methods an infinite set of rules and come up with different outcomes depending on which rules you. The goal of election reform advocates, certainly myself and others that I know of, is trying to come up with a fair system where, have y'all have heard the thing about how do you let kids cut cake without a fight? Right? If you have two children and they have to divide a pie or a cake between them, you say, okay, you divide it, but then she gets to pick which piece, right? That's a way to ensure. That's what we want for elections. We want a system that you would be fair, you would feel is fair regardless of where you are in that story. That's the goal. So it is it's a system that has to work as well in a conservative rural, which tends to be conservative in this country, or urban. You have to have a system that is place independent. And this multi-member full representation voting that I've been advocating for, I think is the ideal for multi-winner legislative bodies. For mayors, governors, presidents, the single winner form of that, I mean, it simplifies down to instant runoff voting, bottom up. I think that's the best we're going to do. You can make arguments for other systems that have a lot of validity, but I'm persuaded that giving people, educating people to train them, to make them comfortable with the idea of, oh, you just rank your favorites, I think that's the way to go. Carl.
I believe that you're saying that having multi-member districts would get rid of gerrymandering? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure I said get rid of, but significantly.
This makes it more difficult.
Makes it so much more difficult and so much less potent. I mean, where there's a human drawing a line, it is possible to conceive of a situation where how slight changes in drawing the line would make a difference. But it is so difficult. If you sit down with the map of Washington today, it's highly gerrymandered. If you try to do that level of gerrymandering, if you had simplified it into 3-member districts, I think you would have a difficult time accomplishing your goals, because for every district where you might make hay, you will pay a much greater price in the other districts.
But it just strikes me again off the top of my head, if you reduce it down to like 3 districts, you're getting pretty close to just at-large voting. The whole state is one district.
But if you but see, the problem with at-large isn't that it was at-large, it was at-large with a 50% threshold. If when you go to at-large, but you say, okay, minority groups can have representation with a much lower election threshold, at-large would be fine. A state like Alaska votes at large. Sam had a comment, and then Carbon. You were raising your hand?
I just wanted to comment that one effect of having this single-member district with a lot of districts is that it will probably lead to success of a number of different parties. So there may be a number of different parties, and of course you could argue whether that's good or bad. In many ways it might be good. A lot of other democracies in the world do have quite a number of parties, and they succeed reasonably well.
Say that again.
Well, I mean, if you basically, if you have several different persons to be elected in a given district, whether
multi-member districts, you're saying.
Multi-member districts, then the threshold is reasonably small, and it means that, well, a small party has a chance to actually get elected. But then if there are 4 or 6 of these districts, say, then maybe 5 or 6 small parties can each get one. It wouldn't necessarily be that way, but that's something that could happen. And maybe that's good. But I think it's something, maybe you were planning to mention this, but it seems worth pointing out.
Well, as Judith said,
it's something different. It's something that different could occur.
Why does the duopoly parties, why do the Ds and the Rs hate proportional representation? Because they've profited for years off unearned bonus power that the voters didn't want to give them, but the voters had no choice. So we would have in Seattle, we would likely have at least one and possibly two more progressive parties flower that are extinguished today. They're not, it's not possible. And you could get in the Spokane, the Eastern Washington, I think it's likely you would have at least one more conservative or constitutionalist party that could win seats in certain places, which is, to my mind, a very good thing. If we end up with majority rule, but minorities have a seat at the table, and I mean minority, not just racial, ethnic, but political minorities, if anyone with a significant block of voters can have a seat at the table but can't run the show, I mean, the horror that we have now is we have minority rule in this country. We have parties representing a minority of the votes with a majority of the power. I mean, Wisconsin was having, a significant Democratic surplus vote translate into 2/3 control in the House by Republicans. I mean, that's pathologic. And it's toxic. It's toxic to people's faith in democracy. And that's inherent in our system today. I like a system where if you get 50 or more percent of the vote, you should have about 50% or more of the power, but you shouldn't be able to have all the power. And that's what a multi-winner, it is almost impossible to conceive of how you can get these lockouts and these gross over-representations if you would elect with multi-member districts.
I mean, I quite agree with you there if there are only two parties. But this system that we're talking about now is one that will make it easier for smaller parties to exist and actually get representation. So you might end up with a US Congress that instead of having over 200 Democrats and 200 Republicans, has 50 of this party and 100 of that party and 100 of another party and so forth and so on, which means no one party could pass something by itself. So they would do what European countries do all the time now, is the parties would have to get together to form coalitions, and then coalitions would be the ones who make the decision, which is fine. That's something different. But I just think it's an important observation to make.
Even better, if you think about that, I mean, I thank you for elucidating the implications of what we're talking about, because what's really powerful in that and what's so attractive in that is that you don't have 11,000 voters in one district in Wisconsin causing the whole country to radically change direction as we did in 1994. I mean, we had an epochal election in 1994 when the so-called contract on America, contract with America, my bias is showing, but the election in 1994 was from a democratic theory point of view, an amazing result, because a tiny fraction of Americans, it's like they grabbed hold of the steering wheel of the car and, threw it into a tailspin, throwing out the Democratic majority by a tiny sliver of votes and leading to a radical change in policy. I think our country and and certainly our faith in elections would say that if we're going to have radical changes in policy, it should be because the electorate radically wants a radical change in policy. Our system is so hair-triggered, the plurality system with single-member districts today is so hair-triggered that a tiny vote can lead to a radical, almost a non-linear, very much a non-linear response in terms of the election results, in terms of power shifts. And that instability, as you've seen the country flip back and forth, it's very difficult. It's hard on the system and it's not good for governance.
I could argue that Israel has that problem with a very different system, which is really a multi-member district for the whole country. But I don't want to get into that now.
Well,
Somebody else.
yeah, nobody's talking about going to a parliamentary party list with a 1% voting threshold like Israel has. I mean, we're not going to that.
There was an interest, I think it was a couple of days ago, New York Times had an opinion piece about which party would you be a member of if you were one of these 6 parties?
If what?
It was an opinion piece with 20 questions. Which party would you be a member of if you were one of these 6 parties? And they did 6 parties that went from the most conservative to the most liberal. And it was fascinating because when you went on to read the article, they then picked out well-known politicians that fit each of the 6 categories.
Sort of typified. yeah.
Right, and the percentages were pretty interesting. We got a bunch of people in the family to take it just to see what would happen. And it was interesting because the spread's there. I mean, we're not a two-party, I mean, we may be officially a 2-party system, but we're not really when you start to look at the spread of where people are.
We're not a 2-party people.
We're not a 2-party people.
And we're not officially any parties. I mean, we have, the parties have, wormed their way into power, but the Constitution doesn't posit
No.
parties at all.
No, but the interesting thing about Alaska is in the movie, this Majority Rules, they have talked to a woman who was primaried out before
Right.
the system changed. And she was primaried out, and she decided to run again. And she was one of their most conservative members. And she got primaried out. When they went to ranked choice voting, she went, oh, I could run again. She went to run, and instead of just talking to all of her conservative people, she went out and talked to everybody. And even in Juneau now, the tone in the legislature has changed because they haven't changed anything but how they vote. They haven't,
Right.
They've got gerrymandered districts, they've got all that good stuff in place, but they've changed how they vote people in. And so they actually deal with each other because they know they have to talk to each other because of what their voters are doing. And it was fascinating to watch that film because my entire voting life was in Alaska, where I never felt like my vote ever counted.
Right.
And to actually see this happen was just, it's pretty exciting to watch it.
You brought up the outreach to non-partisan, the one of the biggest unintended or happy consequences of the ranked choice ballot in San Francisco, in Minneapolis, wherever it's tried, it's the reduction in negative campaigning because of the increased value of your second and third choices. Instead of being told, well, you have to pick your favorite and you have to think strategically about, am I going to help elect my disfavorite because of my favorite? Suddenly you have cross-partisan, slate. You have slates of candidates and they're saying, okay, I understand you're a Democrat. I know you're going to vote for the Democrat, but I want you to think about me for your second choice because, we can agree on this, this, and this. And that positive campaigning, in addition to being much less toxic for the populace, it certainly leads to a better representation in the halls of power. It also costs so much less. A huge fraction of the spending on political campaigns today is negative campaigning, especially so-called independent campaigning. My wife and I just drove through Montana, and Montana is ground zero this year for the Senate race. And we literally, in the several days we spent in Montana, I felt carpet bombed by the ugly negative campaigning, which makes perfect sense in a single winner zero-sum game. I can, if I have a billionaire who will give me the money, I will spend every dime attacking my opponent's character, and I'll do it under the guise of independent expenditure. So it's completely, you can't blame me. I'm not attacking. It's the voter, in a ranked choice ballot, that kind of campaigning backfires. And I think our country would be so much healthier if there was a penalty for negative campaigning of, gosh, you're going to alienate these voters, they will never rank you. That was the other thing I wanted to call out about the Portland video. She made the point, the important point, don't rank anybody you don't want to see elected. Just because they're running doesn't mean you have to rank them. And, ultimately your sixth choice could get some of your vote. So if you don't want that person in power, leave them off completely. That's an important message. But the increase in positive campaigning that has been demonstrated again and again and again, and the complete absence of, somebody pointed out last week that, Australia has been using the ranked ballot for a long time and the instant runoff voting for a long time. No one else in the world has our style of, just carpet bomb negative campaigning because it doesn't pay. There was a comment out in the weeds.
So we have a few things to get through online, so I'll try to be quick with this. Liz Clement shares, Alaska is also a state where people often split tickets, and the state legislature has a long history of coalition majorities. That's true. From a former Alaska legislative staffer. And then she clarified split ballots, not tickets. And then Celeste Landry responded, I think you can say split tickets, and then in parentheses, just don't say split voting.
Okay, well, Judith and Dave are longtime Alaskans, and our friend Liz, I believe that's Liz Clement from Alaska. So thank you for adding that in. And then there's someone else.
Yes, there's quite a few here. So
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no worries. So Celeste Landry says, yes, agree that ranked choice voting is a group of voting methods that use a ranked ballot, but RCV doesn't include all ranked voting methods, such as Borda and Buckland, and then provided a link to more on that. Then Chris Mason says, the Fair Representation Act proposes 2 districts of 5 House representatives. Threshold is 17%. I assume that's Washington because they have League of Women's Voter Washington in there.
Yeah.
Then Liz Clement says, the oil industry also has an outsized influence on Alaska's state budget and candidate fundraising. For many people, that pulls votes right that might otherwise go middle left. Then Neil McBurnett shares, note that besides the exhausted ballot problem with the majority claim, there is another way in which both IRV and STV can fail to satisfy voter preferences. This is the center squeeze effect, which, for example, caused Begich to lose in Alaska's 2022 election. A similar problem can happen in proportional ranked voting, STV, in which a candidate is eliminated early on despite being preferred by nearly everyone over someone else who eventually wins. That, combined with the difficulty of auditing STV and the overall complexity, led me to prefer proportional approval voting, which is more purely proportional in my view. But any PR approach is a huge win compared to our current system.
So I want to go back to the first 5 chapters that we talked about last time. I think Volić did a good job talking about center squeeze, and I mean, it's a problem wherever you have a single winner race. It is even the, we all, I think, agree first past the post plurality is pathological and leads to bad results a lot. The discussion is, what do we do that's better? I think Volić does a good job talking about center squeeze, and ranked choice voting or single transferable vote is not completely free of the concern about center squeeze. But as Arrow's theorem or the expanded version of it is, ain't no perfect system. That, you know, and that's, you know, it's a fair preference. That was Neil, was it? Yeah, I mean, that's a very fair comment. There ain't no perfect system.
Celeste Landry responded to that comment as well, saying, I agree that any proportional representation approach is so much better than single winner elections for an elected body. Example of an anomaly in STV tabulation. Alice Wolfe felt that she lost her 1981 Cambridge Council election because people voted strategically. In 1979, she won her seat on the school committee with 5,490 first-round votes. Quote, more votes than any candidate had ever received before or since. In 1981, she got 1,286 first-round votes, and it ended up with 2,097 votes, 407 votes short of the quota needed to win. She points out that if everyone who had voted for her as first choice for school committee in 1979 had voted for her as a first choice for city council in 1983, she would have easily won.
So I know nothing about that, but the first thing that occurs to me is I don't think we can make any generalizations about a race we don't know a lot about, but certainly somebody who went from being a complete non-official to having an official elected seat and then runs as either for a different seat or runs for re-election to that seat, I don't think you can say they're entitled to start with a presumption that they got all the same votes. I mean, there are plenty of people who get elected and then get unelected the next election. I mean, people get thrown hard votes or they just come at a bad time. I don't know how to respond to that. She may be completely right, but I don't think we can say that. It's 3 minutes to 8. I'm going to cut it off here unless you had one more.
There are a couple more, so I think these are links that could be sent later.
Yeah, Carbon is going to send me the chat links again, and I will do an email to everybody here to try to summarize the book. I also wanted to give a plug for this book called Becoming a Democracy by Kristen Eberhard, and that's Eberhard. Kristen Eberhard is a researcher with the Sightline. Sightline started as Northwest Environment Watch many, many years ago, and she became one of their excellent writers, and she kept coming up against our environmental problems are ultimately political problems because we can't get good policy because our elections are producing results that are not representative of the wishes of the people of Washington. And so she ended up going from an environmentalist to becoming a sort of a citizen advocate. I think this is a terrific book. I think she's a very good writer. You can just Google Sightline and Kristen Eberhard. And if you're interested in the topics, this is a non-mathematical book. It's more of what a mathematician might call hand-waving. It's more argument or more polemic and less, structured, disciplined mathematics. But it's a great book. And I did send out the link to the Majority Rules video. I will send that out again. There was another video that was suggested by Celeste. I'll make sure to include that in a summary link. And I sent you an article today. Did you get the article from Nature? I thought that was a really good summary view of why it's so important that we stop thinking within the single member district frame. Last thing is I'd like to ask all of you to consider joining the League of Women Voters wherever you are, whatever your gender. And, there is no other group of which I'm aware that is in so many places and has so many people who are trying to make their democracy better. If you're not a member of the league, you might consider joining and helping with the studies and the work. It's slow work, but it's worth doing.
There's two, Fair Vote Washington and Fixed Democracy First.
Fair Vote Washington is a 501c4 advocacy organization that I've been associated with for a very long time, and I think very highly of. Fair Vote has been advocating for the reforms. There's a group that I know less about, but is very influential in Washington called Fixed Democracy First. These are also people who are election reform, you would say good government advocates. I don't know as much about Fixed Democracy First. I get the idea that they're basically a 21st century League of Women Voters. I think they're pretty much focused heavily on King County, but that's all I know about them. I'll include a link to them.
The two of them were involved with meaningful movies, putting time on majority rules out, and they're working together. That's why I wondered if there was a connection between the two of them.
I think there's a lot of overlap between them. I don't think there's any connection. I think there's a lot of member overlap.
Okay.
Yes, please, and introduce yourself.
I'm Anita Thompson, and I'm with the Adult Faith Development Committee here at the Unitarian Church, and I'm encouraging everyone to consider making a donation to the church in appreciation for John's terrific class, which was so informative. I really appreciated it, very eye-opening. And we ask for just a little donation of $10 per class session, and you can donate online at OUUC.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, and thanks again to Olympia Unitarian Universalist Congregation Faith in Action Committee who helped sponsor us. We did not have to rent this room. They were kind enough to give us this space. And also thanks again to the League of Women Voters of Thurston County who helped me organize this, helped publicize it, they paid for Carbon, for the tech support team and for getting the Zoom out. I do apologize for the late start, but I'm very glad we were able to have this discussion. I appreciate everybody who cares about these issues, and I don't think I should have to say, don't forget to vote. Thank you.